Hey guys, it's M. And today we're going to be talking about a game I never expected to make a video on, and honestly a game I didn't know existed until 2 months or so when I got it. GunGrave Gore. I'll admit, at first I only started playing it because I had PS Plus Extra and the cover was so edgy. I felt that it would make for a fun quick play. But the further and further I got into it, I felt it was such a unique experience it would be a waste if I didn't talk about it here. Originally I wasn't going to give this the standard segment by segment kind of reviews that I do, but I felt it would be unfair to the devs who seemed super passionate about this series and to their work if I just threw together a 5-minute script with me not digging into this as much as I could have. So, without further ado, let's begin the review. The combat here is probably the game's strongest point. It's a really simple arcade third-person shooter. You shoot, you melee, and you do flashy supers when things get really bad. There's a few other little mechanics like glory kills, grabbing enemies, and things like that, but those are the main 3 things you'll be doing. And the gameplay here is fun. It's simple, effective, and just kinda works when you want a chaotic but simple shooter. But I have some small complaints about it, like how all the information is dunked onto the player. They jammed the entire tutorial for how to play the game in the first level, and then like the short version of 3 things I just explained to you, in game it's shoved on your screen, interrupting the gameplay and forcing you to read a few pages with 5 or 6 sentences each, containing some terms you won't even understand yet practically every room you enter. It kind of felt like information overload off the jump, and since it's the only time the game really does anything this intrusive, it makes it start off kinda weak, and I feel some may drop the game here because they feel like they're studying instead of actually playing. And considering how simple this game is once you start it, it feels unnecessary to an extent. Speaking of unnecessary, some of the small mechanics aren't needed here, like at all. They give you the option to switch between automatic and manual firing, which in a game where you have to shoot this much, I don't see why manual is even an option. It does give you the ability to charge shots, but charge shots are so useless once you get past the tutorial, I never used them again after that. Having melee combos here was an interesting choice. I never really used any of them except for one chainsaw one, as there isn't ever a point where melee feels needed here. You can counter-argue me by saying you need it to break shields, but considering the supers also break shields and hit large areas, 90% of the time I just do them instead. And disregarding that, everyone you play as in this game has burst mode, which lets you do a shit ton of damage. On the off chance where enemies were close to me, I just immediately start shooting in burst mode and destroy them all in a matter of seconds. You can also learn to do some different things when you grapple enemies, but they feel unnecessary. Your throw and kill options are all you really need, and the other ones just do the same thing, if not worse. Moving on to supers, some of them just do no damage and don't feel worth it. Supers here work like how they do in fighting games. Here you have your level 1 supers all the way up to level 3. Towards the end of the game, level 1 supers do practically nothing to even basic enemies. Level 2s, besides from one specific one where you can slow down time, don't feel worth it, and the level 3s are fine, but some 100% feel better than others. Things like the rockets or the spinning slash immediately come to mind. The rockets are meant to be crowd control, but due to how they don't have any sort of targeting and just sort of hit a blanket area in front of you, there's a good chance they won't manage to kill anything at all, making it pointless, especially when they also give you a sniper level 3 that already kills everything in front of you. The spinning slash level 3 isn't necessarily bad per se, but you also have the sniper I mentioned earlier, or the hyper cannon, which you can hold as you can aim. So it doesn't feel like it has a place in your loadout unless you find it cool looking. I find it odd that Grave has these problems with repetitive supers when you get halfway through the game you unlock Bungie, who only has 3 supers, but all of them do everything you need. A punch through shot, an AoE, and his level 3 just feels better than all of Grave's supers, efficiency wise. This last one's a bit more of a story point, but once you get halfway through the game, you get the ability to play as a third character, who's been with you the entirety of the game. And as I'll get into, she's one of the better characters here story-wise. So I was excited for when I'd eventually get to play her. And she's by far the worst character in the entire game. Her shots suck, her melee combat focus doesn't feel good at all. After using burst with both Grave and Bungie to easily clear out swarms, having to punch through people and feel this much weaker isn't really ideal. And her 2 supers are just mediocre. And this is ignoring the fact there are quite a few things Bungie and Grave can do that she simply can't. I understand in the super special Switch version they managed to fully flesh her out and make her one of the many playable characters there, but for her to only be playable in one level, and that being the worst level in the game because they don't want to update this version with her Switch version, just feels rough to me. Keep in mind though, these are simply some small complaints. The combat overall works just fine, just there's some small things I feel were handled oddly. As even with those minor issues, once you get into a flow state in this game, it's really fun, and despite the fact the efficiency of some of Grave's supers can be called into question, they're all animated really well and never lose their punch or cool factor. at least for me. And before I cap off this segment, since I brought up the worst character in the game, I feel like I have to highlight the best one. Bungie, who you unlock halfway through the game, feels amazing. He's animated really well, like I said earlier, all his supers look good and are really efficient, and despite the fact I didn't want to like him when I had just started playing because I thought he was tryhard cool, he grew on me to the point that once I unlocked him, I never switched back to Grave my entire first playthrough. This isn't going to be me digging into a core problem, just something I find an odd choice. The Switch Special version, from all I've seen, is just far superior to the normal version in every single way possible. More characters, quality of life changes, combat improvements, everything. The fact that this wasn't released as a DLC pack or ported to anything other than the Switch is just a bit upsetting to me. I wouldn't mind buying the characters as that's new content, so that makes sense. But since everything else I've read is just overall superior to the base version, I find it odd that they sell a straight up inferior version of the same game. I get when special editions have skins and maybe I can even let multiple characters slide, but withholding simple quality of life improvements just feels weird. And again, even if they didn't let us play her all the time, that entire quartz section would feel a lot better if they gave us her polished variant they made for the Switch edition in base. Oh boy, the GunGrave story. It leads to a lot to unpack. The plot here is messy. I'm gonna be honest, I could kind of follow what was going on, but after a certain point, it felt like things were happening for the sake of things happening. But hey, this is an arcade shooter. I wasn't coming here for the second coming of Dark Souls or anything with the plot. But I also wasn't expecting the awful voice acting. The voice acting here is so bad, it loops around to being kind of funny. Practically everyone here sounds bored or they don't want to wake up their parents by talking too loud. This game presents itself as the epic, edgy, badass game. So honestly, I was expecting everyone to be overacting in their performances, which I personally would have loved. But instead we got some sleeper ones here. Anytime the game wants to be serious, it just ends up being funny.
The Raven Clan, they screwed me over. Fuck that.
You need to force her into her superior form. Once you've killed her, use this tool.
Lesson learned, Grave. I underestimated you. Foolish pride almost cost me my life. Almost. Time to tip the scale in my favor.
There's only really 3 exceptions. Those being the English voice of Quartz, the lady boss you run into later, and the bald guy boss. Quartz's voice actor is just good. I don't have any funny quip to add on to it. She just seems competent in what she does.
Hey, isn't Big Lucian using her voice to control people? Like, sound waves, vibrations, air pressure, liquid pressure. If she can control all that, maybe she can control the new pure seed as well.
The other lady and the bald guy seem like they're overacting just a bit, but considering how ridiculous this game gets at times, I'd honestly prefer if more of the performances were like theirs. The cutscenes range from fucking amazing to goofy in-game graphics. When they're in-game graphics, everyone kind of awkwardly shifts into positions. Grave will reuse a lot of animations he normally does in-game, and the models just look off. Some definitely got it worse than others, but everyone here looks like Unity store dolls. And combined with the voice acting we just talked about, you can imagine whatever they are attempting to get at is overwritten by how goofy things tend to look. Unless the scene is so over the top, it manages to push itself to still be cool, which is when I feel this game's at its strongest. But for the more cinematic cutscenes, of which there are only 3 of, they look so good they almost don't feel like they came from this game. And I know this sounds like a dig, but I don't mean it in that way. They're really impressive and honestly look better than some of the cutscenes in mainstream games we get nowadays. You can tell a lot of effort was put into them, and it really shows. The only real complaint I have here is 2 of them have bits that lag for some reason. And all of them have the issue of insane cutaways. A lot of cutscenes here start the moment a combat encounter ends or is about to begin, leading to some really awkward shifts between gameplay and scenes. Okay. Crazy cutback. All this together leads to it feeling like some sort of fever dream, but not in a bad way. It doesn't feel as if the devs were lazy when they made this game. Just working with what they had caused things to come out like this. It led to me feeling something I haven't felt in a long ass time. That the devs genuinely cared. It's rough around the edges, but there's so many cutscenes, models, voice acted lines, etc. that you just wouldn't do if you didn't care about what you were making. Hell, if I showed someone the final fight cutscene with no context, they'd probably assume it's a AAA game. You may think this should have been in the combat section, but I feel you needed the information from both of the previous points to understand what I'm getting at here. As I said, all of them have some pretty shoddy voice work, but once you begin fighting them, some of them feel like the most fun parts of the game, which was really unexpected. Once you understand them, they feel like they have really fun and fair openings, projectile attacks that feel great to parry, and they require a bit of skill and concentration the rest of the game doesn't, as they require you to optimize your arsenal and decide when or where to do super attacks, making them really work for me. Prime example among them is Jensen's second phase, which mechanically feels so good I almost didn't believe he was in this game. Parrying his energy slashes is hard, but when you learn how to read him, you always have enough time to react to them if you're paying attention. His clones have enough health where they're difficult to deal with, but low enough to the point where if you utilize your bar, you can beat them instantly. His dive bomb attack is fun to avoid, especially so when he has his clones out, and when he misses it, he stays still long enough for you to have an ample amount of time to get your damage in. And while I won't really get into the OST of this game, he has one of the best tracks here. I don't know how many people seeing this review have seen my others, but unironically, this fight feels like the Ishin of Sekiro. A fight so good that I'd probably reinstall the game just to do it again. Even looking at the footage of it writing the script, I kinda want to reinstall the game. And to get off the point of combat, in their base forms they look like pretty generic goons, but when they transform I love pretty much all of their designs. They all look like tech-fused Resident Evil monsters, and it's an aesthetic I didn't really expect to like, though I do have two complaints about them overall. First, they tend to have a lot of follow-up or rapid attacks. As I said before, they are reactable, but if you get in a situation where you do end up getting hit, a lot of the follow-ups are just guaranteed to land, which on hard and even sometimes normal is an immediate game over from how much damage they do. It's a bit overly punishing sometimes in my opinion. Second, you noticed I said these bosses are good when you understand what they do. When you don't, they feel really unfair, and it doesn't feel like you could learn how to deal with them naturally. There isn't a specific tell for what kind of projectiles you can parry, like color coding or something, as it's done in many other games, and many of the projectiles like that, if not parried, come out too fast to dodge or have any other reaction to. Hell, some of the things the bosses shoot at you require specific positioning to deal with, which can only be learned through game overs due to their high damage. It feels like the devs even kinda picked up on this, as once you go down, the game tells you bullet point by bullet point exactly how to deal with every move the bosses have, which to me is a bit cheap and the weirdest way to handle that kind of problem. I wouldn't recommend they change much about the bosses, as I think for the most part they work really well, but maybe once your shield breaks and you get hit a certain amount of times in quick succession, the damage would begin scaling a bit so they don't just instantly maul you. And as for when you can parry, if we don't want to do the simple color system where parryable attacks are a specific color like Cuphead, I think a sound cue would be nice. That way they don't need to throw off the character's color composition and can give players a good indicator. I understand this wasn't the longest review, but considering how simple the game is in comparison to what I normally talk about, I feel that just makes sense. GunGrave feels like a passionate love letter of a game. It's definitely not perfect and its flaws are very apparent, but you can tell their heart's in the right place. The boss fights and designs are great. The chaotic arcade-like gameplay is fun. The story feels absolutely ridiculous, but in the best way possible. In all these things combined, it's just charming. It can be a bit tedious if you played straight over long periods of times like many arcade games are, but even at its worst point, it never drops to, oh, this is unbearable, or really frustrating territory. It stays pretty enjoyable one way or another the whole way through. Would I recommend it? Yeah, but not at full price. As I said, it's a very simple game mechanically when you boil down all those text boxes. It's been on sale many times for like 20-ish bucks, and I'd recommend it around that price point. At the very least, it'll give you something fun to think back on like it did for me. But with that, I feel I've said all I wanted to say, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about this game. As always, as long as you're respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you guys in the comments, and I've been Em, and I am out.